All right, we're talking reinvention today. And Alex, I had a really sobering thought the other day.
Yeah.
That's so obvious. It's like
Right.
so obvious, it's dumb, but I'm already halfway through my life and possibly
Mhm.
more than that.
Yeah. I'm going to guess more.
I'm going to
Guess
guess
more.
more too, but don't say that because I'm already just having to deal with the fact that I'm halfway done. We celebrated my dad's 80th birthday the other day, and I thought, how long is it going to be till I'm 80? And then I'm like, wait, that many years went so fast
hmm
when I was younger. And like, it's going to go so fast if I make it to 80.
hmm
It's sobering, isn't it?
It is. I think we're feeling it, and all the people around us that are our age are feeling it. And that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah.
So let's dig in.
Well, and how we're going to I love the Mary Oliver quote, which everybody says, but I think it's true. Like, how are we going to spend this one wild and precious life? How are we going to do that?
hmm
And I want to spend these next years well. And as we say in the intro, like, there's no do-overs. It's
hmm
like, I wish actually, right? How many times have I wished that where I could go stamp, do over, rewind,
Yeah.
I'm doing a do-over on this, but there's not in life. Like, there's no do-overs because life moves forward, doesn't move backwards. And so how do we do this forward motion well? And
hmm
how do we lean in to the forward into what's next? Because
hmm
I think we can look at like, okay, how do we spend our 20s? Well, we spent our 20s figuring out a career, where we're going to live, a spouse, if possibly we got married. Some didn't, some did.
hmm
But we're kind of building. And then 30s, same thing. Like, some of those probably bled into the 30s for a lot of people, but we're continuing to build, building the career, possibly having kids, and, getting a house maybe, and establishing a neighborhood and a community, right? So it's build, build, build. And then we get to the 40s and we start to ask things like, how long have I been at this job?
Why
Wait
do
a
my
minute.
pants fit this
Wait,
way?
wait a minute. I thought life would be different by now.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah.
really?
Right
I
there.
thought like this is my life because I thought it would be
hmm
different.
hmm
And I still think I'm 20, but now I'm 40.
hmm
And am I doing what I want to be doing? And
hmm
can I keep doing this for X more number of years? Like, is this really what I want to do? And then we get to the 50s, and then those questions become more pressing. Like, okay, I have 10 to 15 more years of this. Can I keep doing it? My kids are launching. What's my purpose now? Do I still like the person in this nest with me? Do I still like this person and want to be with him or her? Is it too late to do something new? Right? These are all questions that in the season of life that we're asking. And so that's a part of why we're doing this episode, because in every season, we have a chance to reinvent ourselves. And one of the things I like to say to my daughter is there's good awaiting you in every season. And I want to say that to you right now, that there is good awaiting you, no matter where you are in those decades, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, wherever you are, that there is good waiting for you in every season. And the great thing is that in some ways, this is the best time to reevaluate where we are, because wherever you are right now is the best time to
hmm
evaluate that.
hmm And let's just pause right here and talk about what we mean when we say reinvent ourselves, because I think, you can go to the magazine cover and see all the stories about reinvent yourself, and it could mean a million different things. It could mean
Mm.
midlife crisis, change your life, go start something new. It could mean have a new look and totally change your wardrobe and your style. It could mean all kinds of different things. So what are
Right.
we talking about in this episode when we talk about reinvent ourselves?
I like to see it as kind of an inside out as opposed to an outside in. Now,
hmm
we may get a new haircut. And we may get a new wardrobe. We may lose 20 pounds or gain 20 pounds. I mean, whatever. Like, I'm not saying that, I mean, more power to you. Whatever the exterior is happening, great. But that's actually not our focus. Our focus is on the interior, because wherever we go, we are there. So, we may move to a new city and change our look, and, who knows? I mean, whatever happens, right? Whatever life brings, or whatever we choose to do to reinvent ourselves. But you bring yourself with you wherever you go. And so if we neglect the interior work, then it's just, life's going to look a lot the same because you're going to take yourself with you, even with your new haircut. So I think that's what we mean, really, is what can we do on the inside of us to really enter into a healthy and engaging process that will move us forward in life and help us to be some of those things that we talked about even in our intro today. We want to be people of optimism. We want to be people of faith. We want to be people who rise up to meet life's challenges and opportunities, because some of them are not going to be challenges. They're going to be opportunities that we're scared to take because we don't know if we have what it takes. And so, there's just so much that is going to be coming our way, because we know for certain that life changes and that we have to change with it or we'll be buried by it. And so what can we do on the inside to be fluid and to be healthy and to be growing and rising?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said earlier about that question in your 40s, or statement. I didn't know my life would be this way. Right. And I think we have so many opportunities when things happen around us or to us that are out of our control, or things change and we think, I didn't know it was going to turn out this way. And there can be grief there. Grief around expectations or understandings that we thought were there that maybe other people didn't understand were there. And so as change happens, there can be grief, and we can get stuck in that and focus in on what's gone or what we never had in the first place that we wanted. Or we can shift our mindset a little bit and say, okay, what does this change provide for me as far as an opportunity? And we've talked before about this idea of diminishing horizons. So something maybe changes, the horizon gets smaller in some way, and that those limitations can actually spark a new form of creativity or force us to be creative in some ways. So this is from an interview we did a while ago with Ken Weitzma from his book, Create versus Copy. And it has been so helpful to both of us to think and approach change in that way, to say, okay, what if instead I say this is an opportunity for creativity? So when we talk about reinventing ourselves, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about looking at those diminishing horizons as opportunities for creativity, to move in the direction that towards God, towards hope, towards his goodness, because he can make all things new. He can use the change, even the change that we don't really like or that we didn't vote for. Like when I voted, God, this was not the direction I voted for. But he can make all things new. In Isaiah 43:19, it says, see, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? That's what we're saying to each other. Don't you see it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Okay, hello, wasteland. Anyone relate to the wasteland? I mean, there are moments in my very full and wonderful and beautiful life where I either look out in the world and I think, whoo, wasteland out there, things that are going on, just the headlines of the day. And it doesn't matter what day it is, right? Headlines of the day. Or in our own lives, in places where, again, we thought, I didn't know it was going to turn out this way. And he is making all things new. He's bringing a freshness. And it's our job to look for it and put on, hopefully, the lens to see it.
Gosh, it just speaks so deeply to me. streams in the desert, that God is there to give us that water in the desert. I mean, that is such a beautiful visual that we can hold on to. And piggybacking on what you were saying with Ken Weitzman's idea of these diminishing returns, one of the things that I like to say is it's the birthplace of innovation. And that just speaks to me because I like to innovate, and that feels really good, just even in my mindset. Like, okay, this is the birthplace of innovation. I get to create something new, right? And that to me feels different than focusing on the loss, because a diminishing return means that we're losing something, that something that has been there before is no longer. And we can camp there an awful long time. And I, especially like, for example, for me, when it comes to my kids launching out of our home, that has been a real source of loss for me because of how I'm wired. And I just love a full house. I love their friends here. I love them here. And so that diminishing return, that I can really focus on the loss if I let myself, as opposed to the opportunity for innovation. So having that like mind switch is huge. And just in that situation, okay, so that's happening. And I'm not going to stop that from happening because that's happening. And ultimately, I want my kids to launch into the world. I actually don't want them living in my basement my whole life, even though I kind of do. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
But ultimately for their good, right? For their good, they need to launch. And so, so what does that mean? What birthplace of innovation is happening, and how can I focus on that? And so that's a real switch in how we think about things. So, okay, let's move into reinvention. Has to begin with an evaluation of where we are now. Like I just said, like I have to acknowledge, okay, I'm kind of sad that everyone's leaving me. I'm kind of sad that everyone's leaving. All right, we have to evaluate, where are we and how do we feel? How do we do an evaluation at this stage in life, Alex? Like what and why haven't we done this yet? Like what can we do as we're going on any journey? Just like if we're going hiking, and you're looking at the trailhead map and it says you are here, or you're at the mall. Maybe people relate to the mall more, but it says you are here. So, I mean, how do we do the you are here well?
Well, it gets back to what is true, right? Like God wants us to focus in on what is true. And dang, it's so easy to avoid the truth of what we don't like about our situations. So I think recognizing that God says it's good for us to say, this is true, even if it's hard. I mean, even this week, we had a situation with one of our kids where neither one of us wanted it to be true, like a medical situation. It wasn't helping us to pretend it away. It was helping, it wasn't going to change the circumstances. We needed to make decisions based on reality. And so I just said to my husband, okay, I wish this wasn't true, like saying it out loud. I wish it wasn't true, but it is. I wish the timing was different, but it's not. So we now need to move forward in this reality. What kinds of questions do you think are helpful as we consider this idea of evaluation, self-evaluation?
Well, that's really good. I think what you just said, like what is true right now. But I think we can also ask, where am I now? Like even how we started, like what age am I? And how many years does that mean I have left? Like that's a sobering question, actually, when we stop and think about it. What is my situation? Okay, my kids are starting to leave the nest, and here's kind of the reality. Like it's almost helpful. You know how when you're going to sell your house, the best thing you can do is pretend like you're a realtor with a clipboard, and you literally like walk through your house and you distance yourself from being the person living in the house, and you try and see your house from someone else's perspective of like, okay, when a buyer comes in, they're going to notice that pile in the corner. They're going to notice that this is not painted anymore. They're going to notice, right? And you start to like have these fresh eyes. Well, I think it's really helpful for us to do the same with our life. Like, okay, I'm going to go to 30,000 feet. I'm going to just act like I'm not in my life. So I'm just like, a producer who's coming in to film my life, like Donald Miller had. He describes in, I think it's Blue Like Jazz, his book Blue Like Jazz, which I love that book, but where they wanted to do a movie about his life, and the producers came in and they started talking to him, and they're like, okay, what else? What else? He's like, no, that's it. And they're like, I'm sorry, but we can't make a movie of that. That's not interesting enough.
Mhm.
And so he said it was so weird because it was like they were talking about his life, but it's like he didn't feel like he was a part of it. And then he started to feel like, okay, this person's so lame that we're talking about. And he's like, that's me. That's me in my life. And so then actually that spurred him on to
Mhm.
go hike the Inca Trail, to bike across the United States for charity. Like he actually, it spurred him on to do other things. And I think that's my point, is how do we almost act like that movie producer coming in into our lives and say, okay, let's evaluate this. Like, let's look at our life story right now: age, situation, job, marital status, kids, general well-being. How do I feel about where I am? What has been my story to this point? Do I like the story that I've created? Or do I want to create a different story, and maybe one that has a little more action in it or a little more excitement in it? I mean, whatever, but just really taking that 30,000 foot view of, is this where I want to be? And then from there, we can make some observations and we can
Mhm.
say, okay, this is true. And this is maybe also true, that I want it to look differently than it
Mhm.
has up until now.
Yeah. And if that feels really overwhelming to say, okay, my whole life, because my whole life feels like so overwhelming right now,
Right. Yeah.
you say, take one slice of the pie and
Hmm.
say, okay, my marriage or my
Yeah.
career or my home or
Hmm.
my relationship with my kids, like my health.
Yeah.
What is one area where I can take that 30,000 foot view and maybe just hang on to that one area for a while? Um,
It's good.
so I think one thing that we need to talk about, you talked about grief and being sad about changes, is anger
Hmm.
and resentment, which is really
Hmm.
anger that hasn't been dealt with, right?
Hmm.
About
Totally.
changing
Yes.
circumstances, things that are out of our control. Maybe it is that resentment of something that you thought would happen that never did. And we're at this evaluation point, right, in our lives. And so if God tells us to look at what is true and calls us to that, part of that is recognizing when there might be some negative feelings that we have been taught we shouldn't feel. And as women, I'm going to link to an excerpt from a Psychology Today article about women and anger. But in general, culturally, women are taught, maybe not overtly, but covertly, that anger is an internal issue that kind of doesn't benefit them and should really not be named. Whereas men can really get societal and cultural benefit from demonstrating anger. Like it's seen as a
Mm.
strength in some situations. So I would just say, for me, that naming it and sitting in that what is true and saying, I'm kind of angry that my
Mhm.
life didn't turn out the way I wanted in this area up till now. Or I'm kind of angry that this person is changing and I don't want them to, but I can't control that. It is out of my control. To name it helps us with that evaluation tool of where am I on the map, and to
Mm.
not be afraid of that, because I think for many of us, and this is just my own opinion here, but I would wonder if for Christian women, especially, that anger is not an acceptable emotion to demonstrate. And so it's also not an acceptable emotion for us to even name in our own private prayer life. And I think God wants
Mm.
us to name it, because
Mm.
then when we know what we're dealing with, when we're doing that evaluation, we have a better sense of, okay, this is where I am on the roadmap. And so I can use my agency to move into a healthy direction. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about, is how do we move in this reinvention process into a direction that is healthy if we're feeling these feelings and we don't know what to do with them. Because I don't know that anger itself is bad. It's just how it manifests itself in unhealthy ways when we don't deal with it, right? We either stuff it and then we eventually explode. And that's not good. Nobody wants to be around a woman who's exploding.
Right.
Or, and I'm guilty of that. I do that a lot. Like, I don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. And then I'm like, how can you not see that I'm upset? Like, all this stuff has been happening. And everyone around me is like, well, you didn't tell us.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. So there's that. Or you let it leak out constantly. You're not exploding, but you're not I guess, harnessing it maybe for good. You're harnessing it in a way that gets back at people, right? It's more of a, I don't know, a tit for tat kind of thing.
And a weapon. It can be used as a weapon. Yeah. So what would you say are healthy ways that people can acknowledge anger, express anger without it crossing that line to becoming hurtful to others, or even to kind of sit in that victim place?
Well, I think we can recognize it, and then we can focus in on what we can change and not what we can't. Because often when we're letting that anger spill out, it's because we keep going back to the things that are out of our control. And we're giving them power again. And instead saying, okay, releasing that and saying, I can't control this, but I can control this. So like COVID, for example, we all experienced a time when many things were out of our control, changes, schedules, plans, protocols. And no matter where you lived in the world for a couple of years, things were different. And I'll say we felt that stress in our home for sure. And we couldn't change some things for our kids. Like, our schools were closed for a good long time. And then when they did go back, they had to wear masks. That was out of our control. So we had to focus in on, if we wanted to use our anger in a way that was helpful, what we can do. And I just feel like at this stage of life, there are a lot of places where we can ask that question. We can apply that question when reinventing our lives. I can't change the career decisions I've made up to now. I'm 48 years old, but I can do this year. I can't change that my body is getting older. My hair is getting grayer. I can't change that, but I can color it. I can't change the fact that it's changing, but I can color it. And I can't, maybe someone says I can't change that I haven't saved for retirement in the way that I wanted, or I haven't had a career that's been lucrative. Okay, but this is what I can do starting at my age right now. And that just helps us take our power back in a way, because God gives us agency, and he also doesn't promise that things are going to be easy. So he intended us to use our agency in these hard circumstances. And that's where I think when we do, we're less likely to resent the things we can't control, because we are controlling the things we can.
Yeah. In fact, if our life was easy all the time, we would forget about God. We would just be on our merry way, thinking in our own strength, we can do everything. The other thing I was thinking when you were talking is just back to Kelly Flanagan's really simple but life-changing model, I guess you would call it, of asking yourself, when I'm angry, what am I attaching to? Like, what outcome am I attaching to that's not happening? Or what narrative am I resisting that I don't want to be true? And so he literally does the fist, I'm attaching, or he does the hand up like a stop sign, I'm resisting. And he said, what would it look like for us to just instead take both of our hands and open them up? So I'm just literally taking my hands and opening them to the sides and welcoming God into that space of, God, this is what it is. And I invite you to come here and help me in my anger toward, whether I'm resisting or attaching, help me in that, help me to let go of that and to just open my arms to what is and to invite you into that space. That is such a powerful tool. I will say it's been like a life-changing tool for me.
Yeah, because what we're dealing with is change, right? It's change that feels out of control, and that can be external or internal. I'm changing as a I mean, I'm changing internally. My external circumstances are changing, no question. My body's changing, no question, but I'm also changing internally.
Yeah.
So what do you think we need to do to break out of a life where we look at maybe just a slice of it, maybe not the whole thing, but we want to make some changes?
Well, I think it starts with mindset, and I'm always going to come back to mindset because, again, if we're focusing on the inside out, right, we want to really do the internal work because wherever we go, we're there. So mindset is where everything starts because our thoughts and how we think about things will determine our behavior and determine the actions that we take. So it really starts with this idea that we get to. So we change that language from I have to I get to embrace change and discomfort. I mean, that's actually a Post-it I have on my mirror, literally. And the way I say it on the Post-it is, I am comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is a Post-it I have up. I have different statements that I have on my mirror. And, that is a mindset where we can say, I'm going to make the decision right now to roll with change. My dad, in fact, that's one of the things with his 80th. I said, Dad, you taught me how to roll with it, in quotes. And he has done that so well. Like, my parents have been some of the best people I know at rolling with it in life. Like, where they're like a river and they're just like flowing, and they're able to ebb and flow. And it's been so good for me to watch because they've given me a model of what it looks like. And I want to be that. I don't want to be the person who's like being damned. You know what I mean? Like, literally, like there's a barricade and my water is just building up into this giant, dam because I can't flow and change. So the other thing is for us to get off autopilot. I mean, so I know I've talked about this before on our mindset episode, but there is in our brains the default mode network. And what that simply means is that our brain is really smart. Our neurons are working for us, and they're helping the brain to not work so hard. Because if we had to think about every single thing in our life, that'd be exhausting. And so our brains are making it easier for us. Like, you, without knowing, do the same routine in the morning. You pick up your toothbrush with the same hand. You tie your shoes the same way. You get your coffee the same way, and you don't think about it. In fact, driving, right, to school, whatever, you don't even know how you got there. Well, that's because your default mode network is turned on and your brain is just allowing you to not think so hard about things. Well, that's really good when it comes to getting your coffee or brushing your teeth. But when we have negative thinking patterns, or we have just kind of these patterns in our life that we just do because they're default, that's when it becomes negative. So how do we switch out of that? Especially if we're talking about reinvention, we're talking about trying to breathe new life into our days and our actions and to where we're headed. We have to actually get off default mode. We have to wake our brains up a little bit. And we have to say, okay, it's time to get off that. And we're going to go into the direct mode of thinking, which is the intentional mode. It's where we're consciously making different decisions. And we can do that a number of ways. One of the ways is to change our environment. I mean, that's why people who travel, it opens up their minds, it opens up their perspective, and they come away like going, wow, like I feel kind of different right now. I mean, I'm watching my daughter. She's been teaching in Spain, and her whole world is in color right now. And that's part of that is because she's out of her environment. She's in a new culture. She's traveling to other places. And it's like everything becomes vibrant. And we don't have to go to Madrid to do that. We can just change it up, though. We can even go new places, do new things. We so get caught in the rut of every Friday night, we watch a movie, we sit on the same couch, we, eat the same pizza, whatever, right? Like we just get caught in these ruts. And so think about, how can I just flip the script of my life? And that helps you get into the direct mode thinking. The other thing that we can do are things, harnessing tools like visualization, where we literally take 30 seconds to 1 minute a day and visualize something new, something, maybe a skill that we want. Like maybe you haven't been speaking up at work and you really want to build confidence. And so you start to say, I'm going to start raising my hand in that meeting. I'm going to start acting differently. And then you start visualizing yourself doing that. I mean, all of those things kind of help us jolt us into the default or into the direct mode of thinking.
Yeah, because change usually is due to an inciting event. And if we wait for that inciting event to happen and it doesn't in the direction we want it to, we have to take the responsibility to create it ourselves. And so whether it's, you apply for that job or you say, I'm going to buy myself some sneakers and I'm going to go for a walk for 30 minutes and I'm going to schedule it and make it a priority. You're creating that inciting event. Or I'm going to sign up for a race and I know that I need to get in shape because that race isn't going away. To create something that pushes you out, as we've been saying the last year around here, we're just going to mix things up because we can get in a rut in so many different areas.
Well, and it really does take intention. Like we are not going to purposefully change. I know this is the most obvious statement, but if we want something to change, we have to change something. Like that is the reality, that we can't expect different results if we're doing the same things over and over and over again. But oh my gosh, do we resist things being different and changing? Like we really do. We're so afraid to take different steps forward or going a different way because we don't want to make people mad. We don't want to somehow, what would other people think if I did that? Do I have what it takes? Imposter syndrome. How will my life change? I can't predict how my life changes. And so how my life will change. So it's safer just to stay here because what if I do that and I don't like it? At least where I am now, maybe I don't love, but at least I know what it is, right? That known is such a draw. And so for us to actually choose change is huge. And so how can we even do that in small ways? I like what you said about, buying the tennis shoes and then visualize yourself getting up when your alarm goes off and putting on your shoes and going out the door, right? Like it could just be small wins like that. And then that leads to bigger and bigger and bigger wins. And we get to build, right? So we get to build on that self-efficacy that is so important when we are making change.
Because there's risk is what I hear you say.
Yeah.
There's risk that it might not go the way we want it to. I might get the shoes, I might sign up for the race, and I might still be wheezing on race day, right?
Yeah.
But
or not be able to finish or.
Part of that small win thing is start with something where, okay, what if you fail? It's not going to, you might not start by quitting your job, or you might not start by doing something really drastic and dramatic, but something that the risk is there, but it's not as risky. So then when you are successful, you've got the confidence behind it, but also you can feel what it feels like to fail if you're not successful and your life hasn't fallen apart because it's not that level of risk.
That wasn't so bad. I survived.
That's right. And so you have the confidence to fail in another area without doing things that are going to be damaging to your relationships or your health.
Right.
So
yesterday, I actually was thinking about when you were talking that, so my husband did Bloomsday, which is a huge, it's like one of the biggest fun runs in the country in Spokane. And he did it with a bunch of his employees. And one of his employees, she didn't know if she could do the race. She's got some asthma. She's got some things that would maybe prevent her from not finishing, but she decided to try. And she, on mile 4, it's over 7 miles, but on mile 4, she checked into the medical tent because things weren't going so well. And so everyone else left because they thought, well, she's not going to finish and she's going to be in the medical tent. But honestly, like just the fact that she had gotten to mile 4, she rested. They said, you're okay. You're going to be okay. They kind of reassured her. And then she's like, dang it, I'm going to go finish this race. She got out of the medical tent. And she walked then by herself the rest of the time. They were closing the race. Okay. I mean, this was like a lot of hours later.
Mhm.
So Eric and all of the rest of the employees, they go to the finish line and they're the only ones there now because everyone's gone. And they are cheering and clapping. And it was Eric said it was the most moving moment to watch her cross the finish line. And they're like, yes, you did it. And it was like this big thing. And it was so beautiful to me because like, that's what we mean. Like she got to mile 4 and she had to check out for a little bit. But then she realized, no, I got to mile 4. I can keep going. And she did. And she finished. And there were people cheering for her. And what a win for her. That was such like for her to feel that in that moment, I did this. That was a long way. And I did it in my medical condition. Anyway, I just was so touched by that story. And I think it's such a good visual of us that we may start a race and feel like, man, I don't know that I have everything that it takes to really do this, but we can do it.
Yeah. And maybe along the way, you might need a break.
And maybe you need a break.
And you need someone to take care of you and let you rest for a second and give you the pep talk. And then you decide, I'm going to keep going.
And then you let people know you're going to keep going. So then you have cheerleaders along the way. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. No, it brings tears to my eyes. I'm cheering for her and she's already finished, but what an example of deciding I'm going to take on this risk because there is a risk here. I may not be able to do it. Doing her best and then allowing the distance that she had gone to propel her forward. I love it.
I love it so much.
Okay. So how do we not get overwhelmed?
Well, okay. I do want to say one more thing because I think this is important. That when we're talking about reinvention, I do think another motivator is to go to a funeral. Have you had that experience where you have gone to a funeral and you've been so inspired that it has made you want to do your life a little bit differently? And that has been true for me, that when I go to a funeral where someone has really lived an inspiring life, I walk away going, whoa, I want to do something differently. But that is one of the things that I think it's one of the tricks that we can harness to live life well, is to actually imagine what it's going to be like when we are 80. And when we are in that space and we're looking back at our life and we're saying, what did I do that I'm proud of? What did I do that I'm so glad that I did? And really allowing that to fuel how we're living now. Because like we said, there's no do-over. And so John Calvin, who is a 16th century Protestant theologian, he has a quote and he said, "We undertake all things as if we were establishing immortality for ourselves on earth." Okay, hello. Is that so true? Like we really think we're going to, like we kind of take on life like we're going to live forever. And he says, if we see a dead body, we may philosophize briefly about the fleeting nature of life, but the moment we turn away from the sight, the thought of our own perpetuity remains fixed in our minds. Death is an abstraction to us, something technically true, but unimaginable as a personal reality. And I'm like, that is so true. And so that's why I think going to funerals or doing that exercise where we picture life forward and then we look backwards and we say, what do I want people to say at my funeral? And you and I have talked about that before. But, what do we want that to be? And then how do we live into that now? That's a part of reinvention. Because if we don't know what we want at the end, if we're looking at the trail map and we don't know where the summit is, we're never going to get there. So what's our summit? And then how do we work backwards from there?
And giving ourselves permission to say what we want.
There you go. Okay, so now let's talk about how do we not become overwhelmed with our decisions toward reinvention?
Well, I do think taking a piece of the pie, seeing that this is the process of being human, essentially, right? So we're not going to be reinventing ourselves where we say, okay, I'm reinvented, done, check, unless it is something like a haircut. And then we can check it off, which maybe we need to build some of those in so we feel successful. We feel like we've accomplished something.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Why are we so like, why does the world live and die by our hair and how we cut it? Like, is that not so we're like, oh my gosh, it's such a change, but like it's hair.
Right. No, hair grows. That's one of my mottos as a parent. Hair grows. You can do whatever you want to it. Other parts of your body, not so much, but your hair, you're in control. And I think it gets to that what I just said about saying what we want. Part of that is asking ourselves, who are we wanting permission from to change, and to sit and examine that and say, is this a person who deserves that kind of role in my life? And maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's an old tape in your head that is telling you something that you don't have permission to do it this way. Like, we have friends who are considering moving, changing jobs. Their kids are now in college. So unlike us, their kids are all gone, except for, here and there. And they're thinking about moving to the mountains here in Colorado, from Denver to the mountains. And Derek's like, wait, you can do that? That's but I mean, it's like that permission. Like, wait, who gave them permission? Oh, they gave themselves permission to do that because they want an adventure. And so we're trying to vocally give them permission. Go do it. Do that thing. We're going to miss you. We're really sad. We don't want to think about it, but we're going to focus in on what's true. And what's true is now is the time to live. And so we're going to give you this permission, because this is actually a healthy way to have a midlife crisis. To, with your spouse, choose to move somewhere where you can have an adventure together. So I think for many women, this idea of, I want to maybe move in a direction that's different than it has been. I want to take some control over the change in my life, that there may be something in there around, you said this earlier, but it might make this person mad, or I'm not sure how this person will respond. And so
what are people going to think? What are they going to think of us? What are they going to think of me?
Yeah. What are they going to think of me? So again, getting to back to what is true, acknowledging those feelings is the first step. And then deciding, how much authority am I going to give these voices in my decision? But I think it can help with the overwhelm, because it can help dissect what are the internal forces that I may not be recognizing, by simply recognizing them and naming them.
And can I just add to this, that if we don't spend time with ourselves to really know what our inner compass and voice is, then we won't know. We won't know even the direction that we're being led to go, because we don't listen to it. So, getting back to Sasha Shilcutt in our Christmas episode last Christmas around boundaries. I mean, she said the first boundary you have to have is spending time with yourself every day, so you actually know yourself. And I just want to put that in there again, because it's true. If we do not know ourselves, how are we supposed to know where we want to head? We won't. So really taking that time to spend time with ourselves and with our God, and figuring out what that looks like for us first.
Yeah. What do you tell people, Krista, when they say, how do I do this and not become overwhelmed? This feels really like too much.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the mindset statements you can write on a Post-it is, the unknown is where your reinvention lives. And I think that is a beautiful statement, because it's true that we resist the unknown, but that's actually where it lives. Like, if we don't go into the unknown, we won't reinvent. So write that on a Post-it. The unknown is where your reinvention lives. And so that helps you to embrace the unknown a little more, knowing that reinvention is on the other side in a good way. And then I would say the other thing is, pick one area to focus on for 90 days. So one there's a book that has really transformed how I do goals and how I kind of move forward into these places that are uncomfortable and into these places I want to go. And it's called The 12-Week Year by Brian P. Morgan. And his whole concept is that you take one thing and you focus on it for 90 days. And that becomes your wheel of change for those 90 days is that one thing. And so like for me, I
want an example. Yeah.
So I have been wanting to create an online course for years, but it's hard and I've been putting it off and it's uncomfortable. And there's a lot that I don't know how to do. And so at the beginning of the year, I decided that this was going to be my one thing. And I will tell you, it is taking so long. And it's been like, okay, I'm upping another 90 days. Okay, I'm upping another 90 days because it's like taking forever, but I am getting there. Like I am putting all the pieces, because there's a lot of pieces that have to be in place before you even start your course. So I'm even just to the point where I have finally finished the pieces that are in place. And now I'm starting a course creation, but it took me a long time to get there. But guess what? I'm like on mile 4, you know, like I'm not at mile 7, but I'm on mile 4 and that's great. And that's fueling me forward to finish. And so that's an example of it's been really uncomfortable. And then, you know, you have all sorts of thoughts like, well, who am I to create a course? Who's going to buy the course? Why should I do this? Is anyone even going to want the course? You know what I'm saying? Like you can just have all sorts of questions instead of doing the work. And those can ever stop you from starting instead of saying, no, this is valuable information. This is going to be of value to people. I'm going to lean into what is mine to do. And this is where I feel led to go. And I am going to step by step start walking in that direction.
Which, I mean, gets us to feeling stuck because of indecision, right?
Gosh.
And I can relate to that. I can relate to that so heavily. And we went through this process with renaming the podcast, where finally we were like, okay, we just need to move forward. And then when we put that fire under ourselves, things kind of fell into place. So, but also it gave us deadlines. So things that we had been putting off got done, or things that we thought needed to be part of the process. And in the crunch, we realized actually we can probably let go of that for now, also happened. So it's that pushing, creating that deadline. It's creating that inciting event almost by setting a goal. But 90 days is a good amount of time. So how do we not regret if we're at a point in our lives where we're like, yeah, I should have done that sooner. I should have made this change sooner. So now my health is in this way, or I'm in this relational pattern that we've been in for a long time. How do we overcome that regret and that feeling of how is it ever going to change now because we're stuck in this pattern? Why now? How do we move forward?
This is so huge. And this is such an obstacle that we don't always recognize is keeping us stuck because we don't realize that it's because we think we should have done it a long time ago. Then we kind of throw up our hands without even like, this is all in our subconscious. Like this is in our unconscious even where we're like, oh, but I should have done it and I didn't. So, oh, well, okay, this is life now. And I'm just doing life on autopilot. And yet instead, what if we say, I love that African proverb actually that says, when is the best time to plant a tree? Yesterday. When is the second best time? Today. Like, okay, so sure, yesterday would have been a great time and probably better to plant the tree, but you didn't plant it then, but you can plant it now.
You focus on what is true. Yeah, right, you didn't plant it.
You didn't plant it, but you can today because guess what? Today's better than if you don't like 3 weeks from now, because even planting it today is better than then. And so one of the ways I think of this in my head is like a chapter book. And we wish often that we would have made a decision a long time ago, or Maybe that we did make a decision that we regret.
Mhm.
And now we've had to live in that decision. And there's maybe shame associated with that, or sadness, or anger, or resentment, or whatever. And so we're constantly living in the past of either what we should have done or what we did do that we wish we didn't do.
Mhm.
And that is not going to move us forward. That is actually going to trap us in the past. And again, life moves forward, it doesn't move backwards. So how do we then, like a chapter book, just say, okay, that was a chapter. Next, flip the page. Like literally picture yourself turning the page. I am no longer going to live in the regret of that story. I'm actually going to say next in my head and change and turn that page so that I can lean into this next season, into this part of my story. And so I really think that is huge. And again, that gets back to mindset of how are we accepting what has been in a way that allows us to kind of let go of it and move forward into the future. And I think a great example of this is our friend Krista Woodman Miller. And she is a Columbine survivor. And she has quite a story. And I encourage you to listen to our podcast episode with her. We will link to it. And think about a story you don't want. I mean, that is a story you do not want to have. And yet that is Crystal's story. And what has she done with it? Well, she helps families and victims of gun violence. She has helped create a nonprofit, an actual like camp where people can go and receive counseling and healing and community. I mean, it's incredible what she has done with this hard part of her story, because she is focusing on where she's headed, not in the past of what happened. She's harnessing that for good in a really powerful way. And that's a dramatic example, but do we believe and do we recognize that God will take all things in our life, things he didn't want for us, even things God didn't want for us, but he's going to use it for a good future. And it's not that, again, like we don't want people to hear that God wanted those things for you, because maybe it was something really awful and hard that you had to suffer through that. But God will use it for your good in your future story. He will increase your compassion. He will give you a vision and a hope for maybe helping people in that same situation. He will use it to fuel you to do things differently and create a new story, maybe for you and your family in a certain way. I mean, it's untold, but God does have a redemptive plan, and his redemption is a thread that will run through our whole story if we allow it.
Because I'm thinking of two other Columbine survivors that I know that are both women of faith that live here in the Denver metro area, and how their stories are so different than Crystal's. And yet you can see God's redemptive thread through them. One of them has become a school administrator. So she was a substitute teacher. She was she was your daughter, right?
Yeah.
Just had traveled the world, recent college graduate, filling in for someone on maternity leave.
Wow.
And she was a graduate of Columbine. So her mom worked at the school, and her mom told her, hey, they need a long-term sub living at home with her parents. So she's closer to my age than Crystal is. And then somebody else that was Crystal's graduating class that Crystal also knows, who has had a really hard go, hard, just the coping mechanisms, the self-soothing, the substance, the relational element that has played itself out. And she is now, fortunately, on the other side of that. But God's redemptive work wasn't the same timeline for all three of them. And so I think our comparison can sometimes be, well, this happened to her.
Yes.
And so, and this was her story. So God, why isn't it happening on the same timeline here? Or why isn't it in the same fruit? Krystal's going and talking around the country on stages. These other two women aren't. That doesn't mean they're not living fruitful lives and using this pain for his glory in a less obvious way, I guess.
Totally. I think that comparison is so good to bring forward, because there's a book called The Gap and the Gain that I love so much. And the whole concept, it's actually really simple. I'll just tell you it so you don't have to read it. But the whole concept is that when we're in the gap, what that means is we're comparing ourselves to everyone else. And in that gap, we will never be good enough. We will never reach the markers, because we're always comparing ourselves to everyone else's markers. But when we're in the gain is the place where we compare ourselves to ourselves. So we say, where did I start and how far have I come? And, the research shows that in that place, that's where we do the really good work of building. And that's where self-efficacy comes. That's where confidence comes. Because, let me just use my son, who's a golfer, as an example. If he compares himself to everyone else's scores all the time, he will never be good enough. If he instead focuses on his scores and how far he's come, well, that builds huge confidence, because he's like, I just shaved 6 strokes off of my game from last year. But how hard is it for him as a golfer, right? Who's a boy in high school, to not be in the gap? It's so hard. But now let's magnify that to our lives, to our careers, to our parenting, to our marriages, right? You could literally fill in the blank. But instead of saying, oh, I wish I had that person's marriage, I wish I had that person's relationship, I wish blah, blah, instead saying, where have my spouse and I, where did we start and where are we now? And let's focus on the gains that we've had. I mean, it's just huge when we switch in our minds from the gap to the gain.
Yeah. Because we can overthink everything. And that gets us to kind of the questions of, how do we stay away from thinking there's one right way of doing something? And because that gets to the fear of, what if I make a wrong decision? And I see this a lot in young adults right now, that they really, for some reason, we have passed on the message culturally that there is one right way to do life. There's one right way to do college, or there's one right way to date. I don't know. But it may be because we're living out that narrative in front of them. How do we not get stuck in thinking there's one right way, and then we have the analysis paralysis where we can't move out of it? I mean, I will say, as a person who I've grown a lot in the last 15 years, but
you have.
As a young person, I tended toward perfectionism, I would say, and performance. Like, I'm going to prove my worth and I'm going to get the A+ in everything. And so that means in areas of my life where I don't get graded, I want to know the right way, because I want to know, if I were to get a grade, it would be an A+, right? That's the perfectionist tendency. But then what I have realized, and I think because somebody pointed it out to me, that perfectionism, we get stuck in wanting to do it so well that if we don't think we can meet that standard, we don't do anything at all. And then we don't take any risks. We don't move in that direction where we'd be at the 4-mile marker, because we say, if I'm not going to make it to the 7 mile in this time, I'm not going to try. And as parents, we would tell our kids, that's silly. You can't just go run a race and win it every time. But yet, some of us get stuck in that. So what do you say to that? How do you coach somebody through that thinking?
Well, I think what's important to recognize in both perfectionism or just not wanting to start is they're both rooted in fear. I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. It's fear that we're either not going to be able to live up to whatever it is that we're doing, or fear of the unknown. But it's all fear. It all comes back to that. And so just acknowledging, I've got fear here. So just name it, acknowledge it. And then
This is true.
This is true, right?
True.
This is based in fear. And one
Uh-huh.
of my, and this is just personally, but one of the things I've told myself that has helped me make decisions is I want to be a person who makes decisions based on whether I discern that it's the right, that it's what is good for this moment or not. I'm not going to make a decision based on fear. So fear is not going to be my decision maker. And that has just in my own mind has really helped me to take it out of the equation. Like to say, I actually am choosing to not let fear make my decision. And probably my biggest example of that was when I was deciding whether to go on that trip to climb Kilimanjaro and go into the DRC, which is a war zone. And it was the hardest decision for me. I mean, I was just like, it wrecked me. That decision-making process was so hard. But at the end of the day, I said, I'm not going to let fear make my decision. And it freed me up to actually make the decision that I felt led to make in that situation, which was a very hard situation. So that's one thing. I'm not going to let fear make my decision for me. And then I'd say the other reason we get stuck is because we don't allow ourselves to try things and to say no decision is totally permanent, that we can always pivot and we can always move in a different direction if it's not working out. I mean, I tell my young adult that right now as she's deciding what her next step is. I'm like, hey, if you do this and you hate it, guess what? In a year, you get to make a different decision, or 6 months, you get to make a different decision, right? Because we're not stuck. And that gives freedom too, to know that if we decide to move forward, we can always then shift then too. But if we never move forward, there's nothing to shift. It's actually when we're in motion that we're changing. It's when we're in motion that we're building the confidence to stay in motion. So I know we keep talking about mile 4, but it's really true that when we get to mile 4, that helps us to know, okay, should I keep going? Should I not keep going? Should I finish this or not? And that actually helps us to know because we're in motion. But if we never start, we'll never know. And we'll always then regret. And I think that's my other thing is think about, will I regret this if I don't do it? When I'm 80, again, we're going to the end of life. When I'm 80 and I'm looking back, will I say, I'm glad I tried that? Or will I say that was the right decision to not do that? And again, there's no guarantees. We can't 100% say whether something will or won't be true.
Yeah.
But will we regret it if we don't try it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we can get into analysis paralysis there in those questions too. Like, will I regret it? I don't know if I'll regret it. Maybe I'll regret it. Maybe it won't be the right decision. But I think we have a general sense of what is the kind of person I want to be. Like, maybe I can't know if I'm going to regret not doing this. But when I'm 80 and I look back, do I want to say I was a risk taker? Mm-hmm. Do I want to say, and is this decision is one way or the other helping me become the kind of person that I want to say that I was when I was in my 40s or 50s?
That's right.
So it can help, because sometimes when we're saying, oh, I'll be happy I did this, I don't know if I'll be happy I did it. So, okay, maybe if that's not helping you, ask a different set of questions.
I think that's really good to say, I want to be the kind of person who fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. That is like, to me, like key statement right there. I want to be the kind of person who does this. Mm-hmm. That helps you to know.
Yeah. I mean, I want to be the kind of person who forgives. Mm-hmm. Talk about like holding on to something.
Right. Oh, wow. Huge.
I want to be the kind of person who is generous. Like get to the character traits of the kind of person you want to be, not so much the producing, because we've been talking a little bit about work and some things that we do, how we spend our time, but also just our character. When I'm 80, will I be happy that I was generous? Or will I be happy that I held back? To me, usually I'm always going to lean towards generosity. And that will help me when I'm not feeling like being generous in that moment, or I don't feel like forgiving in that, or asking for forgiveness in that moment. But
I know this is the silliest example, so silly, but the other day I came to a corner and it was a highway and there were some people walking with a gas can. And they were, I mean, you know, when you think about people you want to pick up in your car and people you don't, I would say maybe they lean on the side of, you may not want to pick these people up.
There's wisdom involved in that.
There's wisdom involved in that. But at the same time, they were carrying a gas can. I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew they'd run out of gas and they were walking on a highway, which was not safe. And I literally in that moment was like, I want to be the kind of person that picks people up who are out of gas, regardless of what they look like. And I did. And I'm so glad I did. But that helped me to make that decision. And like, I get, it's okay if someone would have made a different decision. Like, it's okay. But for me in that moment, that was who I wanted to be. That's who I want to be. And I want to be able to trust, in spite of the fact that it's hard to trust people in the world because of what's happening in the world. I still want to be the kind of person who does, who believes in the goodness of doing small acts of kindness to one another. And that was just a small way, but it was like kind of my stake in the ground in that moment of like, they are total strangers and I have no idea what's going to happen when they get in my car, but I see they're out of gas and I want to be the kind of person who does this. So anyway, I think that is a helpful marker of how we do things. I would say the other thing is, and it gets to a little bit of being that 80-year-old, but roll the clock forward and say, like, for example, if someone's trying to decide whether, you know, to change jobs or not, that seems to be a big one for people in midlife. Like, I'm kind of burnt out of what I'm doing, but how do I know? Like, that gives up a lot of security for me to trade it for doing something else right now. But roll the clock forward and say, in 15 years, in 20 years, will I be glad that I did that? When I'm that age, do I want to be the person who is still at this job? Or do I want to go ahead and take that risk because in 20 years, I'll be so glad I did? So I just think rolling the clock forward helps too. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about just a couple of super practical hacks?
Yeah, let's do it.
So one of my favorite TED Talks is the TED Talk by Dr. Amy Cuddy, and she talks about the power pose. And I know I've talked about it on here before, and a lot of people have seen it, but basically it's before you do anything important. So a job interview, you're going to stand on a stage and talk. You're going to go into a hard meeting. You're maybe even with your child. Maybe you've got a hard conversation with your kid coming up, but you literally do the Wonder Woman power pose. Like, you put your hands on your hips for 2 minutes, and how just that physical posture makes you act differently. So the other day when I was going to go up to give my moth talk for Spokane Pivot, which is their version of the moth, I literally stood like this for 2 minutes because I'm like, I got to do the power pose. I'm going up there and it was like a different kind of speaking. It was a storytelling slam. And so it was new for me. And so I'm like, okay, got a power pose. So I did. I power posed for 2 minutes as I'm like in the waiting area. And it literally, research wise, is shown to build your confidence to make a move. And so I thought that's so practical, right? Where we can just power pose and say, in this confident position, what do I feel like right now? Do I have it? I love that you're power posing still.
I am right now. I got to do it for 2 minutes. And I will say the other thing I do when I'm holding my phone and I need to make a phone call to have a conversation I don't want to have, I count down 3, 2, 1, kind of like in the parenting, but in parenting,
Yes.
kids can ignore you.
Uh-huh.
I can't ignore my own head. I mean, I can, and probably have, but I try to force myself. Okay, I'm going to start dialing 3, 2, 1, or just, a lot of times it's someone who's in my phone. So I don't even have to dial the number. I just need to hit the phone icon to start the call. Okay. What else?
That's super. That is really good. And that hits on Mel Robbins' 5-second rule, where when you wake up in the morning, you count from 5 backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you get up. And it's like there's science behind that. There's like a brain trick to count down. So it's research backed. There you go. Research backed, Alex.
Alex backed. Yeah.
Alex backed. Okay. So the other one is this is also a little mind hack. And that is you repeat, I am excited for 15 seconds. So you go, I am excited. And then you keep saying it. I am excited.
Out loud.
Oh my gosh. I am excited. I'm excited because, like, let's say you're going into a new job and you're terrified. You have to flip that script in your mind from I am terrified and I don't know what I'm doing and I feel like an imposter to I'm excited. I'm excited because just even listen to that difference in that verbiage from like, oh my gosh, like I'm so insecure basically to I'm excited about how I'm going to grow and what is going to change and what new possibilities are going to open up. Like it changes everything. So 15 seconds, you just repeat in different ways. I am excited.
Yeah. And post it on your Insta stories so we can see you.
Yes.
I am excited.
Yes. I'm excited about this change. So good. Okay. Anything else?
Well, sometimes because we need that inciting event and I am not disciplined enough to create it myself, I create systems so that there is an external inciting event. Like I invite people over to my house.
Yes.
Because then I will organize and clean. And then when they leave, I have a really beautiful, clean house. But it helps me, motivates me when that self-motivation isn't enough, where I'm thinking, gosh, I really wish I could change in this department. Having that external factor that is completely out of my control because I counted down, made that phone call, invited somebody over in a week, that means I need to clean up the backyard in the next week or whatever it is. But I think so as a writer, I always have asked editors for strict deadlines. Give me a deadline. And I know because I'm accountable to you that so you and I do that sometimes, I will ask you, okay, what's our deadline for this? Because my internal motivation isn't going to be enough here. Like I need to know that you're waiting on this. And not only are you waiting on it, it's going to trigger a whole train of events if I don't get it done.
So good. I think we can do that for all sorts of things. So like in my example, where I'm trying to create this course and it's been a goal of mine for a long time and I've been putting it off, is I hired a business coach to help me continue moving forward. And that honestly for this season is what I need. I need her. I need her to tell me okay, so you're doing this and you're doing it by this date. Great. Or let's say you are like, I am tired of living in chaos with my garage and my storage or whatever. And so you actually hire an organizer for a day or a half day or 2 hours. But then that forces you to get moving toward that change of being the kind of person who doesn't live in chaos, right? So that's just, it's like, let's set ourselves up for success. Let's do whatever it takes to help ourselves because it is hard.
And okay, so I've been working on my bedroom closet for 2 weekends now. I think I finally finished it yesterday.
Good job.
But it was after we recorded an episode that yet to be aired, but I am excited to share with everyone. And I just started, and I said, okay, I'm going to start on this little section. I'm going to start on this little section. But last night I have a hard time finishing things, right? So then I told myself, I have to keep going. If I don't do it now, when is it going to get done? Like that question, I probably asked myself that 20 times when I was like, I don't want to do these earrings anymore. I'm so sick of looking at these earrings. And I told myself, no, you are in the place you are in because you didn't deal with these earrings for the last 5 years. So when else are you going to do it if you don't do it now? And so that has been helpful too, to just like self-talk myself and say, no, that behavior resulted in the point where you are now. So let's not go back to that. So let's talk about that. How do we stay on course when it gets hard, when we're like, I'm kind of done. I don't feel like doing this hard thing anymore. How do we not go back to our familiar ways? Because we just are people of habit, right? We go back to what we know.
That's right. That is, man, we are creatures of habit, as people like to say. And so I would say, a couple of things we just hit on that I think is important is the first one, don't travel alone. Get other people on board with you that will help you get to where you want to go. So if you want to finish a 5K because you want to be the kind of person who is staying involved in your physical shape, or it's the wrong way to say it, but if you're someone who wants to improve your physical fitness, stay healthy, then, you sign up for the 5K and then you ask people to come alongside of you. So don't travel alone, get a coach, hire an organizer, whatever you need to do. And then I'd say the other thing is just recognize that we all hate to be in the remodel. And that's exactly where you were, in that place of like, all my clothes are out, my earrings are out, and it's a disaster, right? And so the default is to just go back to what, go back, just stick it all back.
Stuff it all back in the closet.
Stop doing what we're doing. And when we make changes in our life, we will want to run back to what we know. That is just human nature, because it feels so uncomfortable to be in that place. Like, and I just think of it like when we were remodeling our house. I mean, when we're in the thick of the remodel, it was like, what have we done? This is absolute chaos. And what are we doing? And it's, of course, more than we thought we would be in every way, more time, more energy, more resources, more. It always is. And when we're in the middle of change, we're going to feel that same thing. Like, this is taking more time than I thought. This is requiring more of me. This is more uncomfortable than I thought it would be. This is more vulnerable than I thought it would be. And we're going to be in that place of feeling like we're in the smack middle of that remodel. And we're like, what have I done? That is normal. And what I want to say is, just because it's hard, it doesn't mean it's not right. And I think we start to tell ourselves that narrative of, this is hard, so it must not be right. And that's just not true. Let's look at marriage 25 years in. I mean,
there's just so much right there.
But truly, like, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not right to stay in it, to work through it, to get to new places and spaces together. And so recognize that it's uncomfortable when you're in the middle of that place, but that doesn't mean it's not right where you're supposed to be. All right. What do you think? What are some ways to stay on course when it gets hard?
Yeah, because I just want to quit. I'm much better at starting things than I am finishing them. So that remembering that my old ways no longer serve me. Maybe they never did, but they're not going to serve me right now. And so I'm not going to focus on the fact that we got to this point, other than allowing it to motivate me to make that change forward. So just remembering my old ways no longer work. It's that diminishing horizon, back to that I have to change because things around me are changing, so I can make the change work for me, or I can get exhausted trying to fight it.
Mhm.
And then I would say, again, taking a sliver of the pie if the whole pie feels overwhelming, and say, I'm going to focus on one change, and I'm also going to focus on maintaining it.
Mm.
Because like my closet, for example, if I don't maintain it, then it was a lot of work that maybe helped me get rid of some things. So,
Mhm.
overall was helpful, but it's going to be a lot more helpful if I maintain this level of organization for the rest of the summer, or
Mhm.
maybe think about it in 90-day segments, since 90
I think
days
90
seems to
days
be,
is brilliant.
yeah,
Yes.
for the
Because
rest of the summer.
we can do things for 90 days.
Yeah. So that's what I would say is, it is remembering that in order to move forward, it is going to be a little bit hard. And boy, when you said that, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not right. It's such a cultural commentary right now,
Mhm.
right? So if we're going to be world changers for good, right where we are, we've got to start with our own little corner of the world and
Mm.
say, I'm going to do what's right, even if it's difficult, and even if I don't feel like it. And because it's the right thing to do. Because when I'm 80, I want to look back and say, I was the kind of woman who
Mhm.
did what was right in this situation.
Mhm. So good. I think too, it's helpful to look toward other people who are doing things well, who are going through change as well, who are reinventing themselves, and watch how they do it. And I think when we think reinvention, it's like kind of going back to our initial conversation. We think we have to be a whole new me. Look, it's a
Mm-hmm.
whole new me.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of recognizing that, no, it's actually one small step at a time. I mean, let's just even watch like a movie. Like if we're looking at a movie, a character who transforms from the start of the movie to the end of the movie, they didn't just all of a sudden change. They actually went through all sorts of, they went on a whole journey to change. And then they kind of come out as this new person, new confidence, new energy for whatever, right? Well, that actually is more of our journey. The change is happening as we're going. The change in us is actually while we're moving. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
another way to look at it, that we don't want to stay stuck because we don't change when we just stay where we are. The good work of change and internal renewal happens as we're in motion. And so it's a process that we go through. So reinvention is not just ta-da after one decision. It's okay, I'm taking these small steps forward in this area, and then this area, and then this area. And in doing so, we are reinvigorating our internal life. And that creates that reinvention.
Yeah. I'm going back to my power pose, because it's a process. I have to keep doing it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because it's already time to face something I don't want to face. And I can do it. I can do this power pose because God's with me. He's gone before me. He's next to me. He will remain behind.
Yeah.
And it is through his strength that I can move forward.
Okay. So talk to me. Say, I am excited.
I am excited. I am excited. I'm excited.
So excited.
I am so excited to have this hard conversation. I mean, that's really what it always gets down to for me. Or I'm so excited to delve into that closet that scares me to death because I've put things in there that I want to avoid. But I'm not going to avoid them anymore because they are no longer serving me stuffed in that closet.
That's right. My gosh. So good. All right. Well, friends, as we are rising, as this is our time to rise, we are going to rise into these new opportunities, into these changes, and we are going to reinvent ourselves in the process. And we want to hear how you are doing that. So message us on Instagram, tag us in your stories, reply to our emails, and hopefully you are a part of our email list. If you're not, please get on it, because you can literally hit reply and we will read your email. Comes to us. So tell us, how are you doing this? We want to know.